incredible people. It's your favorite motivator from afar, Michael Mallory with the Motivational Jump Start right here on WHUS Stores, on WHUS 2. Oh my gosh, I'm excited. You know how I get blessed and fortunate motivators out there in the world, that I get so many connections out there in the world, and so many beautiful and amazing minds and intellectual juggernauts come into the university, and they come share their story and their truth and their greatness, so forth, so on. And I'm just extremely excited right now because we have an amazing visiting a scholar that's going to be doing incredible lecture today at the university, and it's going to be sharing his story and so many things, the power of sport, so forth and so on. In studio, we have an incredible guest, Mr. Eli Wolff, who's a program director of sport and development project at Brown University, intellectual juggernaut, guru. He's done so many things, an activist, believes in the power of change. If you need to know more about Mr. Eli Wolff, you can Google him because Google tells all the business, and we appreciate Google. But in studio, we have an incredible mind, Mr. Eli.
Yeah, really looking forward to the conversation, and just your passion is inspiring me, so this is going to be awesome.
No, absolutely. So, Eli, tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself and what makes you come alive. What inspires you?
Cool. Yeah, no, I've been very passionate about the power of sport and kind of how sport can be transformational. I guess now for about the last 20 years, I would say. It's kind of got me hooked, both from my own experience as an athlete. I was on 2 Olympic teams in '96 and '04 as an athlete, but really for me it was that whole notion of what was happening beyond the field, beyond sport, and how sport was really kind of so influential in so many ways to affect people. And for me it was really about those people that were excluded, sort of the issues of injustice and human rights that really were inspiring me. So for me, as a person with a disability, that firsthand experience of seeing issues of equality and inclusion, but then as my mind grew and as I began to see the world of sport, I saw issues of race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, so intersectionality of diversity, but also exclusion. And so for me, getting involved internationally with the United Nations and all sorts of things, I started realizing how I could connect those dots between sport and human rights.
Right.
And so that's really been my passion. And for me, it really, whether or not I knew it or not, kind of an interesting story is my grandfather was he was a clerk with Justice Earl Warren during Brown versus Board of Education.
Wow.
And so that he then became an entertainment lawyer and represented lots of really amazing people and did all sorts of cool stuff. But just that story of realizing that he was part of such an important case in our history of the United States, of all deliberate speed and those kind of thoughts about how do we change the paradigm of who gets included in education. And so for me, that's been my passion about sport, like who gets included, how do we really make sure all people, whether you have a disability or not, whether whatever racial background, sexual orientation, gender, so forth. So I think that's really been my passion, and I've been able to see that at an international scale, and to see that too, that it's not just what's happening locally, not only nationally, globally, to make those connections. So that's a little bit of the passion.
Wow, I think that's amazing, and you touched on a lot of that right there, Eli. So take the listeners back. I'm not sure if you mentioned it. I didn't mention it in the bio, but just where's Eli from, and just a little bit about you growing up within your intersection and love of sport, and then just kind of where we're gonna work from there.
So I was born in Los Angeles, and then my family moved out to Washington D.C.
Okay.
When I was younger, and then for me, I had a stroke when I was 2 years old, but then I was back playing soccer by the age of 4, and soccer became a really big, thing for me. I was just always out there playing soccer. It was like a sort of a safe space of where I could achieve and be successful. And for me, playing soccer, I, played high school soccer, I played college, and then I sort of was spotted one day playing, and I was told about the Paralympics. The Olympics for people with competitive sport, people with disabilities. And that really just was a whole world that opened up. But the 3 things my family really emphasized for me was academics, service, and sport. Those were probably the 3 biggest things that growing up were sort of reinforced over and over. So for me, when I was younger, I was always the one raising my hand on social justice issues, and even like in like third and fourth grade, like I remember one teacher like called out, some kids on like issue of discrimination, and I like yelled at the student, and I was sent to the principal, and then I ended up like having the teacher go to the principal, and so like there were those dynamics, right? It was like always kind of a voice of like wanting to be whether or not I wanted to or not, I just was,
Right.
I was just passionate about issues of equality. And then when I got to high school and college, I was very active in the service. And I did a number of sport-related projects. We were getting student athletes, getting the general community involved. And that was sort of combined with my being on teams, sports teams. And so oftentimes on the athletic field, I was like the one player being like, what have you guys thought about this broader social justice issue, even though we're about to compete for like the bronze medal or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's sort of this interesting dynamic of the coaches being like, Eli, you need to focus on sport. And I was like, yeah, I'm focusing on sport, but I'm also really passionate about, these 10 other things that I think are really important that we need to be thinking about. So I took this course at Brown. I went to college, and the sport and society course actually, and a professor kind of showed me, and we kind of went through the books, and I was just really kind of interested in the fact that not in any of the book, it's like in the history books where there's nothing about the history of like the real story.
Yeah, for sure.
And,
Yeah.
And for that, there was nothing on people with disabilities in sports, and nothing about Paralympics or Special Olympics or Deaf Olympics or athletes competing at different levels of sport. There was not a chapter really, and so I just became, that sort of sparked me, and then I ended up doing like thesis work and fellowship work and that kind of stuff, and then I got introduced to folks that are in the field, and but when I started to do the work, at the same time there was a big international project happening on what's called sport for development, so how sport is being used as a tool for development, and at the United Nations. And so that's kind of how I ended up getting kind of early on into the international sphere. But I guess a step before that was right when I graduated, a really important big case was happening. Casey Martin, a professional golfer, who utilized the use of a golf cart, and so kind of, again, going back to my grandfather, kind of working at the Supreme Court under Justice Earl Warren, it was just really crazy for me to have the chance to work with the Supreme Court when I was like 20.
Wow.
To kind of do that work with Casey Martin. Well, I guess I was 22, but like right when I was graduating, to have this court case kind of take the national conversation of what was going to happen to Casey Martin, what did it have to do with the rules of the game? Was it fair play? Was it opening up the Pandora's box? Some really interesting conversations, and I got involved to kind of mobilize the national disability sport world to support Casey Martin, because the PGA was saying that if they allow Casey, then all these other people with disabilities are going to want to change rules, and it's going to open up this Pandora's box.
Right.
And so we wrote this brief to kind of refute that point, and also we utilized actually some folks in other sport management programs around the country, but that were helpful, legal scholars, to help with the case. So it was really inspiring. But again, for me, it wasn't really about disability. Even though it was a disability case, it was more about human rights and social justice. And so that started to get me thinking about kind of disability may have been a starting point, but it's really this broader journey of athlete rights, kind of activism about how do we really ensure kind of the human dignity of all athletes and freedom of speech and those kind of things.
Wow, and I think that's a very powerful element that you just touched on that. So we dissect a little bit of that, Eli. So I'll start with the point where you were younger. So you were in school and you're seeing this, and whether you consciously wanted to be engaged and wanted to be vocal, you kind of was compelled to do such. Was that isolating for you? Was that empowering for other individuals around you in these certain school systems? Like, what was that dynamic? Because as we know, especially with cyberbullying and all these other things that happen from just speaking up, a lot of students to a degree, well, maybe so more so now I know there's the power of social media and Twitter and all these different things. But what was that for you? Was it isolating? Was it empowering? Did other people rally behind you? Did educators say, okay, Eli, stay in your place, do your schoolwork? Like, what was that like? And then we're going to build, would you get into Brown, so forth, so on. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, oftentimes those people that do decide to take an activist stance or speak out, it can be somewhat isolating. And, I think that for me at a younger age, when I was speaking up to the athletic directors or the PE teachers or, or just kind of trying to voice myself and assert myself as having a place in the classroom, I did have some really good peers and friends and things that were, really close. And I actually, I haven't told the story in a long time, but like in the
exclusive,
like in the eighth, like 7th and 8th grade, I put together this like presentation of like, kind of a human rights presentation on just what it means to be a person and a human, and like how people need to be included on all ranges of ability or kind of across diversity.
For sure.
And actually one of the some of my friends now, they've really gone on to do really cool things, and it's fun to see kind of that core group that we put that together. But yeah, I mean, it was weird because in some ways I felt like it was like a great thing, like the whole school attended, and it was really great to kind of open up the conversation. But I also was kind of like exhausted at the end. It was sort of, I felt a little bit like a little isolating at the same time. So, and then when I joined like different teams, and like one time in a younger age team, there was a kind of a bully kind of kid who was kind of like sort of harassing me and just sort of making verbal comments about my disability and stuff when we were playing soccer, and I had to like kind of prove myself of like scoring the winning goal, and like for him to kind of shut up.
Right, yeah, of
so
course.
Like I kind of had to like be I felt oftentimes, growing up through different teams, through different levels, you have to kind of prove yourself on the field to then get people to respect you and show your legitimacy. But also to kind of open up those conversations and talk to people. And, sometimes with like bullies or whatever, I just try to talk to them or kind of explain why that's not a really good way to think about the world.
Right.
But it was such a young age. I mean, so I had, for me, having both of my parents were very involved. I would say my dad and my mom. My mom in particular, we're still really close, and she was definitely like a big advocate for me and with me, and so I do think that it was sort of a combination of both like finding allies and solidarity and finding the people that I could trust, but also feeling sometimes isolated. When I came up to boarding school in Boston at Milton Academy. And I mean, I got really involved in the service world, and I organized a lot of projects and got really involved, and definitely a lot of really close friends and supporters. But yeah, no, I think it was really when I started competing on the Olympic team, on the Paralympic team, is when I really started to see some of the isolation even more, because that was when I really started being more vocal on kind of issues of equality and justice with my teammates and with coaches, and a lot of some of my teammates and coaches would really try to tell me not to speak up, rather than empowering me to speak up in ways that could actually help my performance. Because in some ways I felt like because they were trying to have me not talk about stuff, that actually ended up impacting the way I performed on the field. Because I think if they had supported me, I actually think I would have done better as an athlete.
Right.
Because I think that because they were telling me not to speak up, or they were telling me like, don't bring up that issue, or now it's not the right time to talk about the fact that we're not getting, we're getting kicked off of elementary school field, stuff like that, that I would feel compelled to like want to share that with somebody, and they'd be like, no, we shouldn't complain, because if we complain, we won't have any field, So, but it was so I do feel like the issues that you're bringing up have actually been throughout, but even more so once I got involved at the Paralympic level. Right.
Which empowered you, though, what I'm hearing for the listeners out there, because I think a great great scholar out there, M.K. Asante, always said, once you make an observation, you have obligation.
Yeah.
And a lot of times individuals reduce that obligation. Or I'm just one voice. What can I do? Or maybe they'll be mad at me. Or even though the coach or coaches or mentors, etc., are trying to say, well, don't rock the boat today, you know, which could be devious in nature, etc. I feel as though, even though in some ways the support didn't aid in your performance, but the competitive you was like, but I'm still going to be vocal and I'm still going to push this. So competition is coming out either way,
exactly.
you know, from that level. So you transition from this era, and then you select Brown, and you go to Brown, and you know, you're still empowered. You got involved, you know, with the Olympics. How did that continue to morph you just as a man, as a person, to say, I'm very, now I have something. I've gotten so much friction over the years, and clearly since I'm getting this friction, something is there.
Yeah.
I'm gung ho to continue to do this.
Yeah.
Speak a little bit about that as you now transition in from adolescence to young adulthood, you know, to that experience that you end up getting, you know, at the Supreme Court.
Yeah. It's funny because sometimes I feel like my passion, going back to passion briefly, is like it's still the same as like when I was 12 years old.
12
you know,
years
like
old.
I feel like I'm still in some ways doing a lot of the same work, as I was when I was really young, which is good. I mean, because I feel like it's been such a core part of my identity and who I am that it's sort of stuck with me, and I found ways to kind of go after it. You know, I do feel like, you know, kind of coming out of college and getting the opportunities. You mentioned it briefly about mentors. And I feel like, you know, I did end up having along the way a number of mentors, both this professor at Brown who taught the Sport and Society course, who kind of got me to connect with folks like Dr. Richard Lapchick and Harry Edwards, and you know, folks like that. Bruce Kidd, who's a Canadian activist scholar, and kind of got me into the pathway of seeing what some other people were doing. And then when I could see that there was a lot of work being done on race and gender, I did a lot of work with Women's Sports Foundation, Donna Lupiana at the time. And but all of them were very supportive of the fact that you know, there really wasn't a lot being done in the disability realm, and there also needed to be more done at kind of the international realm collectively. So when I approached them on like, well, could we do more with just a broader kind of human rights conversation, they were really supportive, because I had, you know, done a number of international seminars on Olympic values and human rights and things. So I came back with that, in addition to all the disability rights work. And but on the disability work, they really did. They opened up a lot of the relationships, a lot of the networks, a lot of the information. And so that was really inspiring to have mentors that were willing to, you know, give me a shot. You know, again, I had just basically a couple of years out of college. You know, I kind of had some ideas about how we could, you know, create, you know, kind of parallel documents or parallel resources, trainings, information. You know, bringing up the fact that a lot of these issues that we're seeing around race and gender are very similar. Sexual orientation are very similar if you look at disability, but oftentimes this kind of fourth leg of the stool is been missing from the conversation. You know, we're not getting to the table. We're not able to, you know, people with disabilities are not in positions of power to actually communicate this message. I actually just wrote kind of a brief piece about like Horton Hears a Who, you know, Dr. Seuss, like, there's this small community that's like trying to have their voice heard, but like no one's listening. So sometimes I still feel like that is the case in this regard. And then I think as I began to expand into this relevance to kind of this broader athlete rights, human rights conversation, you know, discussing with people around the world kind of how this is not just an isolated issues of gender or race or religion or culture, but it's kind of this broader human rights framework of sport, and kind of how is Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the UN Human Rights Commission, kind of these various groups actually tackling sport.
Right.
And, you know, there's a few people here and there around the world that were doing little things, but there wasn't really a cohesive body. And so you know, it was also just interesting to start being a part of this broader movement of athlete activists, because I had been contacted by this another kind of scholar advocate, Peter Kaufman. He was doing some work around athlete activists. He interviewed a bunch around the country and even internationally. And I was really inspired by his work, and I asked him if I could, like, actually join him on the research side. And he was open to it too. So it was really great because that also expanded my mind and scope, to be able to make these connections and see how, like you touched on a moment ago, like isolated athlete activists are, and kind of how do they get started, how do they get inspired. And a lot of it comes down to mentors and resources, and getting the right, like right now Harry Edwards is mentoring Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah,
so,
for sure. Yep.
Sometimes it really takes that kind of information to, be liberated, if you will, for kind of the ways that you can articulate yourself or share a message. And then so I started working on this, like, Athletes for Human Rights project that I co-created with some colleagues, and just to start that conversation about kind of where do athletes fit into, like, the same conversations as lawyers for human rights or doctors for human rights, athletes for human rights. And really it's been great because it's really brought about this kind of broader connection. And then as part of that, we were talking about, well, where's Muhammad Ali and all of this? And so we had some contacts, and got introduced actually through Richard and Harry and some others to the Muhammad Ali Center. And they were really receptive about how can we, like, be a home for athlete activists? How can we? So that's sort of been my more recent part of the journey. Is I still have disability as kind of a core element, obviously a strand, but for me it's definitely widened, and just seeing the types of organizations and the type of people around the world that are now doing this type of work, beyond the field, if you will, or really recognizing that sport has this broader purpose and this broader value, and the way that it's contributing to the lives of, the thing about sport is it's like so many people are so invested in sport, but oftentimes they see it as like this escape from reality.
Absolutely,
or this way of just entertaining themselves, and it's not reality, but that is the reality. And so part of it's like, how do we get people to realize that sport is, in any way we're interacting with sport, it actually has this broader purpose, this broader value that's actually impacting your decisions, the way you're leading your life. And so it's not, this notion of escape is kind of interesting to think about. But it's so I feel like this passion has been really great for me. And sometimes I also try to, in my work, I try to identify projects that are really tangible. So to take some of the research and take the study aspect and say, well, how can we get this policy accomplished, or how can we mobilize this conference, or how can we actually make change in really practical, tangible ways? Because I don't know, for me, I'm not really about just putting something on a shelf. Like, I really want things. How can we have a policy that's adopted by 500 200 governments? To me, that's the way that we are slowly impacting change. It's also about being it. This isn't just, again, it goes back to, it's not like my job, or this is just who I am. This is what I do, and so it's just a passion that I live by.
Yeah, that's powerful. And Eli, those words are so profound, because it's one of the elements of the show is just getting individuals to find their truth, right? So I like to bring individuals who are walking in their truth, right, to hopefully activate that level of greatness, or foresight, hindsight, whatever, in individuals to say, well, even if I do have a different job, or even if I'm doing these other things, even in my industry or aspired industry, future, whatever it may be, that I can still be, a change agent in these different ways.
That journey, that innovation, the passion. Yeah, I always love that with young people, or just, I get contacted a couple of times a month by people that have either they've never heard about sport for development, or they think they've invented it themselves. But sometimes they have really good ideas, or just they want to contribute. And so it's always amazing to kind of bring people into the fold, or just finding people with those great ideas and passion.
Right. So what would you say as we kind of wind down, and just the listeners out there, this is just the sample, the appetizer, but What would you just say? I guess briefly, like it's it's 2017, and I have different intellectual debates or creative discussions, whatever we want to call it nowadays. But so many people, it's like, okay, in America, just global society, we're so interconnected with technology, but it just seems as though in certain realities, people are just so far disconnected. So you briefly mentioned on we can't really escape the realities of sport, even if you think that this is your escape or this is just entertainment. Why do you feel, to some listeners who just may not know, that people are still trying to preserve sport as just this escape and separate sport and politics and gender and all these different things? Why are so many people so invested in that? And then just two, what do you believe or would you potentially attribute just the disconnect with this being 2017 for so many people who may just really not see the benefit of sport and development or that intersection?
I mean, I think that for a lot of people around the country, even around the world, there's sort of the notion that sport is a separate entity and kind of has a separate terms, conditions, like separate rules of how it operates in our society, and other aspects of our society. We have a lot of like terms and conditions and the ways that we are expected to have it monitored, evaluated. It's, there's certain human rights protocols on, all sorts of aspects of our lives, of how governments run, how things run, how organizations run. And I think that in some ways that the realm of sport is it's wanting to be protected. It's wanting to be like really this notion of escape. That sport does exist in sort of a different realm. And I think that in some ways that's propagated, it's reinforced, it's not been questioned as much until probably, it's questioned kind of in pockets, kind of here and there over the years, of course. Even obviously the '68.
Yeah, for sure.
Smith and John Carlos and
Summit, yeah.
And it's been amazing to talk to like just hear their story and knowing that they're still involved even today. I was just with them recently, and so I think part of it is these little pockets of questioning the system have kind of happened, but there hasn't really been a sustained kind of societal question, and so there hasn't been enough of a movement to really kind of change the way sport is existing. And so I think that until there's kind of that groundswell, until we can kind of create a way for sport to still be, a place of fun, a place of enjoyment, a place of joy, and that we can, go to it and have a great time and do our best, all the things that we love about sports, but also find balance with it where we do recognize there are certain terms or certain regulations or certain ways of not discriminating, not, you have to abide by Title IX, you have to be inclusive, you have to, you can't, launder money, certain ways of practice. I mean, in any industry, there's obviously obvious, but there are, corruption.
For
all
sure.
industries have corruption, so I think it's expected that there would be some in sport, but to the extent that sport kind of goes unmonitored and there's not really any kind of human rights protocols in place for international sport organizations, and so I think there's a lot to be done in sport, but I do think it's a long road for the sports culture just because of the history of and also the cultural conditions of the way sport is defined. So, and particularly in American culture, but also even internationally, sport has sort of been on a pedestal. It's like kind of in this, people kind of give it a pass. It's like, oh, well, we can, we have to do it in all these other areas, but sport is different. And so I think until we're able to kind of, as a society, agree that we need to question that and have the similar expectations of sport as we do any other sector, I think that, it's going to be a harder journey for the few that are trying to speak up. Because right now it's kind of a reverse system, because now those that are speaking up are sort of like looked at like as like weird, like foreigners to the system. And really, I think it's like on its head right now. And so, I think it'll be interesting to see if there's progress that can be made and built on kind of a little bit of a groundswell,
Mm-hmm.
and whether or not that can be sustained. Whether like there's recently at the international level a international body that's being formed on kind of human rights protections in sport.
Mm-hmm.
So, whether or not that might have influence. That organization is particularly focused on professional sport,
Mm-hmm.
as well as focusing on amateur and to some extent on grassroots. So, but I think if any of this stuff, again, whether it's human rights in sport or human rights in a lot of other domains, it is that journey. But I do think that one of the things that I found over the last 15 years of sport is that it's even harder because of a lot of the assumptions, a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
ways that we protect sport, um, and that those that do question things rather than being like, oh, that actually helps us, instead it's like, be quiet, or. So I think that part of it's how do we change that discourse, and how do we just open up to have more freedom of, you know, just working together to solve these problems, rather than those few like were like seen as kind of like, strange for bringing up these topics. So I think that's part of the. I actually enjoy that because I think it's because it just creates a dynamic of like, how do you, it's called, for me over the last many years, it's been like, well, how do we frame this?
Yeah.
A lot of it is how do we frame the conversation. And so I feel like the challenge for those of us that are working to bring up issues of sport and society is like, how do we frame this so that we can actually have a real conversation, so that we can actually have real outcomes. Because there's many times where it's just like shutting the door, or you're getting either they open the door a little bit and then they close it, or it's like not even open at all. So like part of it's like, how do we just have an open door where we can talk and try to figure it out together.
Wow, wow. But listen, I'm here in awe, and I mean, I think, like I said, being a personal fan of yours, Eli, and just the work that you're doing, and just that, to your point, you said it's interesting, even though it's you do other things, and it's still a strand, whether it's from the disability aspect or other things, that you're still rooted in, your purpose and your truth from being 12 years old. You know what I mean? Prior to that, and I think those unique experiences, and grandfather being a part, a Brown versus Board of Ed, and just all these other experiences that have been kind of this totality that has, been able to you grapple with and use to continue to push the needle forward. And then you met some pretty cool people. So I would say, and then because we got to save a lot of this good good stuff for the lecture. So I have two last questions for you. For whatever reason, just for the listeners out there, just name drop some of the favorite individuals out internationally. I know he can't name everybody out there, so just some of the notable ones that you might have like, wow, I just didn't know that this work would have allowed me to meet Harry Edwards, or would have.
Yeah.
So that, and then the last one, any just words of advice or your mantra for life that can inspire the listeners and others just to continue to potentially find their truth and pursue and fight for whatever it is that ultimately they believe. So
Cool.
my two questions for you.
Yeah, no, I think just briefly the interactions that I've had with John Carlos and Tommy Smith.
Yeah.
Those I think have probably been more of the profound kind of interactions, and also just to realize how humble they are and how giving and how supportive they are. Just that's been, and of course, Dr. Lapchick and Harry Edwards. Those for them to just be so gracious with their time and to support my work and my passion. But yeah, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, those two in particular. I guess one other would be Dick Fosbury.
Yeah. Okay.
Dick Fosbury, the Fosbury Flop guy. He's just a really cool guy, and he's like, just the fact that he an innovator, that he at a young age he again, it's like it kind of goes back to all of our work, like everyone does it one way, and then one person does it a different way, and that changes the paradigm. It changes your lens. It changes, and so I think that's, and also he's another super humble and really friendly, supportive. And then as far as
his words that you would leave to your mantra, quote, whatever that may be.
I actually just saw a quote like a couple of days ago that was really cool. I mean, I really love the quote by Dr. Lapchick about a leader is not only someone who stands up for justice but does not block its path.
Mm-hmm.
But then I guess I just saw one just kind of floating around about a leader is someone who you're not a leader until you mentor someone who's a leader, and then that person mentors someone else who's a leader. So it's not only that first person, but it's really the second.
The second.
Kind of how do you pass them? So again, I touched on mentorship a little bit, and that's something that I really feel is just important in general. I'm still kind of working with how we've done just a recent project with Muhammad Ali's foundation on mentorship, just because he's been such a global mentor, kind of thinking about the power of mentorship, not only in sports, but even beyond. And but I do feel like mentorship is a big part of social justice and social change.
Right.
But yeah, no, leadership quotes, I think, and messages, I think those are what oftentimes inspire, and I feel like I'd like to pass those on.
Definitely. Well, Eli, I definitely appreciate it, as I always do. To the listeners who know I get these grand opportunities, we're going to have Miss Sophia Reed just come tell you a little bit about the event really quick, what's happening today at 4 p.m., and we're going to wrap it up. So thank you all for tuning in, but hold on one second. We're going to have Sophia Reed tell you about the event a little bit more in depth.
Well, Beyond the Field is back for the fall, and we've got Eli coming to us at 4 p.m. in Gentry, which is housed in the NEAC School of Education, right behind the Student Union. Gentry room 144. It's on the first floor, big room. You can't miss it. We'll be able to hear more from Eli, hear more of his story and his work, and we hope you can join us.
All right. Well, definitely, Eli, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for coming to UConn. I know your lecture is going to be phenomenal. To the listeners out there, continue to be the change, continue to find your truth, and be looking for the playback coming soon on all the social media channels and on WHUS. So for WHUS Stores, for WHUS 2, this is Mike Mallory, the Motivational Jump.